call to order the Conservation Commission for July 2nd of 2019. Just like to remind everybody this is being recorded, and if anybody hasn't signed in, please do so, and during any presentations, please come up to either the podium or the table. So the first item on the agenda is for a request for determination of applicability for Paula Flanagan, 6 Ships Haven. Oh, that's it. For proposed construction of a garage addition and second-story dormer, replacement of existing bay windows, deck, stockade fence, reconfiguration of the driveway, and upgrade of the existing septic system.
Good evening, Lynn Hamlin. Hopefully start you out with an easy one. The project is basically just what you read. The only resource area is land subject to coastal storm flowage. There's no other wetland resource area within 100 feet or even further. There's no performance standards for construction in a flood zone other than that it comply with Mass State Building Code. The septic system, here it goes. I'm looking at the wrong plane. The septic system, I just read my narrative, is going to be upgraded. It requires no variances from Title V or Town of Harwich regulations. The existing deck's to be rebuilt within its footprint, its current footprint. There's a garage expansion which will require a little bit of fill around it. They have to reconfigure the driveway a bit to accommodate the garage expansion. And there's an oak tree that will come down for the septic upgrade, and I am imposing my favorite trees on people's projects, so this project's getting an American beech tree as a replacement. And I'll stop there and see if you have any questions.
Okay, Paula, do you have any comments?
Maybe you have any comments?
Oh, thank you. No real comments. It's land subject to coastal storm flowage, so there's very few performance standards. Just want to make sure it's not going to have an adverse impact in the event of a storm. I think the replacement of the oak with the beech is appropriate. The garage is on a slab, or is it on a foundation? Do you know?
I don't know.
What type of foundation?
Let me see, I gave you house plans. Let's look at those.
Just, it matters to me.
I don't know. I don't want to misstate what it is.
That's okay.
It's got to comply with flood zone construction either way.
Right. And because for the commission's edification, because the entire cost of the project on the dwelling itself does not exceed the 50% rule essentially for building within a floodplain of the cost of the assessor appraised value of the house, they do not have to make the entire dwelling flood compliant, so they're not proposing to do so here. And I would recommend a approval with a -2 because it is technically in a resource area. That's all I got.
Okay, Paula, you have any
Yeah,
comments?
no, we were out there today. It's pretty clear cut.
John?
Yeah, seems pretty clear cut to me. I saw it as well. I don't have any questions.
And no comments from me.
Do you have a motion?
Okay, I'll move to approve the RDA for Paula Flanagan at 6 Ships Haven. With a
-2.
determination.
Okay.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? No? Okay.
Please sign.
Thank you.
Yep.
And now you're all warmed up.
Yep. For all those who just came in the room, there is a sign-in sheet in the back, if you wouldn't mind, be appreciated. Thank you.
Okay, next we have a request for an amended order of condition for Deborah and Leo Heffernan, 54 Uncle Vinnie's Road.
Thank you.
Thank you all this evening for having us present our proposal. As we said in our presentation, we're seeking a couple of things. One is to install an irrigation system within the 100-foot buffer zone several of you were there today and saw the area that we were hoping to accommodate. The second part of that is to permit us to allow some minimal fertilization, just to keep the grass from burning out, and answer any other questions you may have.
Okay, Paula?
So this, this project is kind of another, we kind of added on to a previous project where the Heffernans did some invasive removal near the stream, which is actually a herring run that connects from Red River to Skinnequit Pond. They did some invasive removal and replanting and are well on their way to finishing up that work. So in addition to that, but their conditions were that they couldn't have irrigation or chemical application within the 100-foot buffer. And due to our recent discussions about irrigation and chemical application, and I recommended that they come, if they had wanted to do any such work and have those conditions changed, they would come back. So the irrigation that is proposed is in essentially the front of the house, the lawn area and the foundation. It's within the 50 to 100-foot buffer zone, and there's nothing proposed in the 0 to 50. It does have temporary for the establishment of the native plants, which were previously permitted. So they would like to do some irrigation, and you did actually a very nice job of both showing it and writing out what you would like to do here. I think in this location, it bakes, it's very hot and dry. So I don't see the negative impact that irrigation would have to just this area. I do, however, think the commission has been extremely stringent on its chemical application regulations, and because it is near a herring run and near a couple of different wetland resources, I can't recommend we vary from that. What I would recommend is that if it turns out that some of the grasses, which may be more non-native ornamental grasses that have been used to create that lawn, that if they do not do well, that any reseeding you do what you do with a native grass seed, and that those are much more drought tolerant and also require less in the way of nutrients. So I'm sorry I can't recommend everything, but I can recommend the irrigation piece.
Okay, Paula?
Yeah, we were out there this afternoon. You've done a very nice job, and I have no questions at all. I agree with the irrigation, but I also agree with the allowance of chemical applications at this time.
Okay, John?
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much agree with Amy's assessment. Irrigation is probably okay, probably not any fertilization. I know the problem with lawns around here, one of the problems is 2 or 3 inches of topsoil on top of sand dries out really quickly, which is one of the reasons why people need irrigation, aside from highly cultivated grass strains. But we haven't talked about this on the commission, but it seems to me that one way to approach this is not only allowing the irrigation, but encouraging people to add amendments, top dressing soil, and I don't know whether we would permit this or not, but trying to add water retaining materials to the lawn, and that might be a conversation we should have on the commission about people can improve the soil in their lawns without contributing to nitrogen and phosphorus loading in surrounding resources. But I can't support the fertilizer. I think that irrigation makes sense.
Sure.
Yeah, I agree with Amy and John.
Okay, I have one question on the irrigation. Now, are we opening a can of worms with other properties? For example, 68 was right near you. I'm not sure if they were in the wetland there, that part of it, but they had their sprinklers, their temporary sprinklers on, watering what they've seeded. And so can we end up having more and more people trying to get that exception. Not the fertilization, but the
Right.
watering.
I mean, based on, I think, our discussion at the last meeting or two, it seemed like the commission said, nothing in the 0 to 50, in terms, except for temporary to establish the plants. But, it seemed like you wanted to give a little more leeway in the 50 to 100 for that on a case-by-case basis. I mean, on a site that is very exposed, such as yours. I think if you take it on a case-by-case basis, you are okay. You're not setting necessarily a precedent. But I do think it's gonna be site-specific. This site, I think, lends itself to it.
Brad, do you have any?
No comments.
Okay. Anybody from the audience regarding this issue? Okay. Do they have a motion?
And I'm just curious if you had any other comments
Oh, I'm
based
sorry.
on what we had.
Cool,
No,
We're
that's,
good.
that's fine.
Okay,
we understand.
okay. Thank you.
Just tell everybody else.
Do they have a motion?
Yeah, I'll make a motion. How do we do that when we split it up, Amy?
You can just say to allow the irrigation as proposed, but to
Okay.
uphold the decision for no chemical application.
All right, I'll make a motion to approve the RDA for 6 Ships Haven.
No,
No,
it's,
sorry,
uh,
I'm
54
sorry,
Uncle Vinny's.
54
it's an
Uncle
amendment
Vinny's.
for Uncle Vini's, yeah.
For the installation of an irrigation system within the 100-foot buffer and 200-foot riverfront, and to not allow any additional fertilization on the property.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Paulo seconds it. All those in favor? Say
Aye.
aye. All those opposed, no. Motion passes.
Thank
Thank
you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much.
Now it's back to you.
Thank you.
So you don't need to sign this, because what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna change their conditions, if it's all the same, and we'll send that out as a revision.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you,
Bye
have a
now.
good night.
On to the notice of intents.
Yes, the first one you can announce, but they would like a continuation until July 17th.
Okay. All right, well, first apologize for being late. There's a lot of traffic out there. It's
So
summertime.
we figured,
Yeah.
no worries.
Mid-Cape is not very nice right now. So next, we have a notice of intent for 4 Shady Drive, proposal for new dwelling and appurtenances. They've requested a continuance until the 17th.
Yes,
So I motion that we approve that continuance.
I second it.
Seconded by Stan. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Okay, next up, we have Witchmere Harbor Real Estate, 23 Snow Inn Road, proposal for building and hardscape modifications.
whole team. You can bring more chairs up if you think more than David's gonna be speaking. See how it goes? Thank you.
Good evening. I'm David McNevich with Coastal Engineering. Welcoming representing the applicant this evening in this project. Here tonight also is Andrew Singer, attorney, George Gakitis, who's the project architect, and Bill Ganchert from Witchmere Harbor. So what I have up on the board now is the existing conditions. I think you're all quite familiar with the property. On the property is, there's a deck area along the beach. Nantucket Sound is off the board down to the bottom. A deck that's down on beach level. A pool area raised up about 4 feet or so. The beach deck is about elevation 8.5. The pool patio is at about elevation 12.3. and there are 2 swimming pools there. There's an existing building on the west side of the property here, and then there's also a pavilion area that they refer to as the coastal restaurant. So there is, wetland resource areas are coastal beach, coastal dunes to the west, and land subject to coastal storm flowage. There are a couple of flood zones that impact this particular project. We are in velocity zone, 2 of them, elevation 15 along the beach and extending up to this line here. And then over on the west, it's another velocity zone, elevation 13. The existing building here is constructed on a conventional type of foundation. Would be non-conforming to current building code and FEMA flood regulations because it does have a basement. And what this project will entail will be replacing that building with a new building and reworking the pool area and the swimming pools. And I'll show you that. Restaurant on the ground level. Oh, down in the lower level.
basement level.
Restaurant in the basement level in the existing building. So this plan here, we sort of deliberately superimposed what's proposed over and lightened up the background, so it looks a little busy, that's why I highlighted it up. But yellow represents the developed footprint now with hardscape and decks and buildings as it exists. You know, as you approach this area, there's a brick driveway that comes up with parking, grass parking on either side. And then you get up to a brick entryway, and there is a brick driveway that comes down between the property line and the building that provides access out to the beach area. And there are 2 swimming pools. The existing, I've denoted in the pink, so just for color coding. So here's the building. There's 2 swimming pools. There's a kid's swimming pool over in this area. There's an adult pool over in this area, dotted in light. And then here's that pavilion area, the coastal restaurant area. And there's a pool reception area because that's how you access into the pool area now. So what's proposed is represented in blue. This is the footprint of the building that would be constructed. It's larger than the existing building that's there, but we are maintaining the location of the face of the building on the west, and the expansion or the enlargement of the building would go towards the pool inboard and replace some of the patio area that exists there now. And then there will be a second building constructed over in this corner, the northeast corner of the existing pool deck area for restrooms and a small retail area. They sell some T-shirts and things here now. They have an area in here, but this will be restrooms that will help to service this restaurant and bar here. And then this is open air. The intent would be to extend that. Again, it's on columns. It's a roof-to-over area. The roof line would replicate what exists out there now. And that is those are the buildings and the changes that are being proposed. And then we've dotted in blue the relocation of the swimming pools. And the kids' pool would be flipped over to the east side, and the adult pool would be on the west side, closer to the new building. One of the big improvements to this is that this new building would be constructed completely in compliance with the current building codes and FEMA flood regulations. Be constructed on piles, and even though there will be some enclosure walls below the flood elevation, they'll be designed as required to break away. They actually have to hinge. They have to stay attached to the building so that debris is not floating around and causing other storm damage. And so that will allow floodwaters to pass underneath the building as is required by the building code. The key is that this brick driveway that's on the west side, that would remain in place, so there'd be no disturbance, outside of that footprint. In fact, the intent is to keep that brick driveway in place and construct inboard of that. All of the roof drainage from the building and the patio would be collected into a stormwater collection system, and it would be leached over here in a leaching facility that's in the lawn area, just beyond the fence, and that is actually outside of the buffer zone. So what we're showing is the 50 and 100-foot buffer zones to the 100-year flood land subject to coastal storm flowage lines here. So those are actually more inboard than either the beach or this artificial coastal bank, which is this green line which represents the segmented block wall that exists there now. So this is actually more landward than that. So the leaching facility would be, for the stormwater, would be in or outside the buffer zone. We are showing on this plan the drainage system collection, the drainage collection system, leaching area. And then this is an updated plan from the one that you have in your packet, and it was because we were able to further develop the leaching facility, and for the restaurants here, the kitchens, there'll be some grease traps that'll be located back in the lawn area as well. Grease traps, and then that will connect to the existing wastewater treatment plant, which is up in the northwest corner of the property, or closer to the northwest corner of the property. This also will, this building will provide some accessible access. There are 2 elevators for the new building. One is a sort of an exterior that's out here on the pool deck area, and that'll allow accessible access to the upper floors. And then there's also a service elevator here. And one of the things that we're proposing is on the south side, out to the deck, is to actually put in a door from the building from this lower level. The intent is that it provides an accessible access way for people that need the accessibility into the elevator. They can come down to this lower level and come out onto the deck, and then they can actually come out onto this here. So it's accessibility, plus it'll also, the kitchen is up in this corner on the upper floors. There'll be a service elevator here where the food can be brought right out onto that beach level deck, that 8.6 level. There's also an access corridor here. That'll be for deliveries to come in. This is open. There'll just be a gate across here, and then there'll be a doorway here for this hallway. I think I would stop there and open it up to any questions you may have. There's no work proposed in either in the beach area or in the coastal dunes. There'll be no impacts, adverse impacts on either of those 2 resources. So, and then the work that is proposed is in land subject to coastal storm flowage, but there are no performance standards in the state wetlands regulations, nor in the Harwich Conservation Commission regulations regarding work in land subject to coastal storm flowage. for the reasons that that it's inboard of everything that exists there now, we feel that this project meets the requirements for construction.
Thank you. Amy, any summary comments for us?
There's a lot going on, but in summation, it is all occurring within existing footprint and either on existing impervious patio. Things are just essential. One building is getting bigger, yes, but it is covering, again, area around pool that's already, it's not natural, and it is coming, it's all self-contained, essentially, within the existing hardscaped area of the site. So your improvements, I'm recommending approval of the project. They're able to keep the work limit extremely tight as well, so there'll be no impacts to the beach or the dunes. And the benefit is that instead of a non-compliant building in a flood zone, that when you do have a flood, you know, that could be very damaging to not only itself but abutting properties. You're gonna have a flood compliant building, as well as a building or grounds, if you will, with better drainage. So one question we did have, the couple of us who went to the site, is, I mean, I'm familiar with the Mass Building Code in that since it's a velocity zone, you have to be 2 feet higher, your structural member of your structure. How does that come into play with pools? Because this is just a curiosity thing. Obviously, your pool deck is, we pointed out, a certain level, so the decking is going to be above. But how does it work when your pool itself is going to be lower? If you wouldn't mind coming up, George, thanks.
It's a vertical surface,
Vertical surface.
so that's dug below, so it doesn't, waves don't hit it. The velocity is wave action, not
Yep.
flood, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't have any questions.
Okay, well, let's go around the table. Do you want to start, Paula?
Yeah, I was there this afternoon. You did a great job explaining. I have absolutely no questions.
Thank you.
So, I have a couple questions. One is, I didn't understand your answer about why pools aren't an issue in the flood regulations. That I would suspect that if there was significant wave action hitting up against the retaining wall there and overtopping the retaining wall, that things could start coming apart. And I'm just wondering why that isn't a problem or would not be a problem.
Well, it's pre-existing,
I think, to expound on, I think what George was trying to say earlier, the wave height, the wall exists and the pool deck exists now. The pools are recessed into the surface so that it's not that waves are going to be striking a vertical surface. I think that's what George was trying to describe, that the waves are not striking a vertical surface, they're passing over the top of it. The pools are not an impediment to wave action or the movement of floodwaters. It's going to be passing over the land, and the pool is recessed below that. So there's no force on the pools. The pools are full with water, and they're gonna get inundated. There's really no.
Okay, but along with that, you're stating that the existing retaining wall is compliant with current flood standards. That is, the retaining wall itself is a vertical surface.
Yeah,
So my question just is, how does existing flood regulations, flood zone, building code apply to that retaining?
The building code does not regulate retaining walls, and that's a retaining wall, the existing wall. I mean, you need to get a building permit, but it's not subject to flood regulations and those requirements.
Okay, well, I have one other question, which is, underneath the new building, there's going to be a significant volume under there, which presumably that volume needs to remain empty, right? You will put breakaway panels, but if it's used for storage, that could become an issue in flood conditions, right? So I'm just making the point that, or asking the question, shouldn't we be putting some conditions there that that area not be used for storage, since in a storm, anything stored under that large volume would be, in fact, probably blown loose and create the same kind of problem we're trying to avoid by insisting on this sort of construction.
The building code and the FEMA regulations allow that area to be used. The area below the base or the design flood elevation can be used for, in this case, can be used for storage, parking, and building access.
You can't have things like utilities or
All of the
any
utilities
type
have
of
to be
waste.
elevated
Any
above
type of
the base
waste you
flood
can't have
elevation.
under there.
So that is allowed by the building codes and the FEMA regulations.
Yeah, it's,
Okay.
Stan?
No question, huh?
Jim?
Yeah, the project looks good. I don't really have any questions on that. One thing, I think every project that we've approved has come under the condition for no chemical use or no fertilizer use on lawns within a 100-foot buffer zone. That's something we've been very consistent with. I'm not sure what parts that would come under on this project.
Well,
We don't have any of that.
the project,
Should be outside the.
Doesn't it,
Are they separate properties?
yeah,
It would apply to the whole property, not just the area of work, basically.
well, I don't know how to answer that question off the top. I mean, it's all to the north or up on this plan,
Yeah.
as we talked about. That is it's the Grand Lawn, I think, right?
That's correct.
It's the Grand Lawn. It's used for events and recreation and, but that's
Well,
all
I'm not
existed
sure.
for a long time.
I don't believe that would necessarily be in a buffer zone, but there may be some areas on the property that are in a buffer zone.
There's a lot of the property that is in the
flood zone.
on the flood zone.
A 100-foot buffer zone to wetland.
In the flood zone and within the buffer zone.
It doesn't
I mean,
apply to
the property is pretty
flood zone.
extensive. As you can see, this plan is showing this area here.
Yeah,
There-
yeah.
There's all this property that goes all the way up.
Now I'm looking at it through a satellite image right now, yeah.
Yeah, so there is a lot of long-standing existing lawn area. I don't know.
The regulation doesn't require the reduction of lawn area, just that you can't fertilize or, and the commission has been very consistent with that with homeowners. We haven't had a project like this come before since I've been here, but.
Well, let me ask a related question and come back to that, because I might have missed this when you were giving your presentation earlier. Are there any changes to the amount of impervious surface? No square footage changes?
No.
No.
Usually we see, a table that shows changes, so your amount of square footage of lawn will stay the same.
there's no change to
When-
the lawn area.
There's no change to lawn area where,
Right. Well, right now you have lawn around the pools, right?
No.
Patio.
Not inside the fence,
there's
outside
lawn
the fence.
over on this, here's the
Yep.
yellow line here and
Yep.
here and here. It, well, actually comes to here, is the fence.
Yep.
And this is the brick walkway reception. So this area, so to the north and to the east, up to this brick driveway, is all lawn area. This is dune and this is beach down.
Okay, so
But there's no lawn here.
All right, I apologize, I didn't make the site visit. So there is no change to the lawn as it is now?
Nope.
And you're really just, you're shuffling square footage of impervious substrate to just, it's 1-to-1? There's no real
Correct.
change? Okay. So what do you think, Jim? Is there any area that would be in our jurisdiction that you would not want to see it fertilized or have applications?
Well, yeah, I mean, it looks like the area you're referring to is the Grand Lawn. It's probably outside of the buffer zone mainly. There's an area along the coastal dunes to the north of the project. It's between the brick driveway and the coastal dunes. That would be certainly within the buffer zone. There are some other areas on the property. It's, the regulation is just no fertilizer or chemical use within the 100-foot buffer zone.
Also, I mean,
I wonder if it would,
also.
just something to throw out there, I mean, to get a better understanding of maybe what that use is on the property, what their current practices are now, if the commission is considering getting into that, and I think maybe understanding what the current practices are would be a first step too. Or I do view, and I completely understand what you're saying, Jim, but I think what they're proposing to do really isn't impacting. I know we impose it on sites, but their whole project is within, not within lawn. So
Yeah,
I understand.
I agree, but we've been consistent, just as the sites come before us, we have required that for, regardless of the work on the site. It's just simply to provide better protection for the resources. That fertilizer is quite harmful to the Nantucket Sound and the harbor and everything.
Yeah, well, let's have a discussion, if you don't mind, for a couple minutes. It's a large redevelopment. It sounds positive, great for the property. Is there any opportunity with this work to find some environmental benefits to the neighboring resource areas? Are there any pieces of this where you might be able to reduce your fertilizer use or your chemical applications? Jim's point is really good. That, Witchmere Harbor, blooms with algae every May, every June because of runoff. And I'm not saying it's this property, it's all the properties. So is there any opportunity with this work to find, some small, benefit? I don't think we're talking about litigation here. I think we all agree that the project should go forward. I'm just wondering, is there any opportunity here to, find some improvements?
I mean, it's something that we can certainly look at. I don't know if you have anything to say now.
Well,
Maybe
it's,
not, but
most of the green lawn is for parking. It's better than pavement, correct?
Yeah.
It would be impossible to keep that grass without some sort of a fertilizer. Impossible.
Right.
And irrigation. That's my only concern.
Right.
And I'd hate to rip that out and pave it or whatever you have to do to
Right.
provide parking for the property.
What we could certainly do is, it wouldn't be for this project, but for future projects, to certainly study it. Obviously, it would require study. We couldn't make a decision because we don't know everything that's out there, but we could certainly agree to, for future projects, and there will be some, I'm sure, in the future, to look at that question to see, if there are opportunities.
You're gonna come back to us, I think, to mitigate for the tiki bar. That's coming before us
Yes.
before too long, so maybe that could be a component of that as well. Just maybe investigate what your application practices are.
Yeah.
What are you putting down per square footage?
Sure.
And just look for opportunities to reduce that loading if possible.
okay.
I don't know if, for this one, Jim, if it really applies, and again, I didn't make it there for the site visit, so I don't know if there's any particular areas that, we consider having that condition.
I don't think there's anything, the work area is all hardscape for hardscape. There's no mitigation needed, but that regulation we've been applying just as projects come before us, regardless of what the project was essentially. And it seems been really consistent with homeowners that this is our first resort that's come before us.
Yeah, I know what you're saying, it's a little different because it's a very long-standing practice having a lawn there, and they're not really proposing to alter those conditions. So, is there any grass at all in the 0 to 50?
On the site?
Yeah.
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah.
And the site's huge.
But not being disturbed with this project?
No, but we'll be back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's what we're really looking to do, is to try to reduce that loading in the 0 to 50. And I think we would recognize some traditional uses in the 50 to 100, certainly.
It's kind of hard to say that right now, but to me, but I think maybe when we do talk about the tiki bar when it comes back and any other, that maybe at that time it's an appropriate time to have Bill look at what your current practices are and see if there's ways to improve them.
I think that's fair, but I do want to point out that right now, yes, there is some nitrogen load. We know there's nitrogen load and runoff from the impervious surfaces, and we are putting in a drainage system that it will be get up to the treatment standards for mass stormwater and town's requirements for stormwater drainage, but it will also move that outside the buffer zone. So that's sort of a incidental improvement. It does mitigate some of the nitrogen that would be in the buffer zone. I'm not saying it's a one-for-one offset, clearly, but there is some improvement there. So what's the nitrogen that would be getting discharged in the buffer zone.
So you're reconstructing that stormwater basin?
That's an entire new stormwater drainage system for the new pool and patio. And even though it's clean runoff, all of this roof runoff, which right now is not, it discharges down to the ground through gutters and downspouts. It's all gonna get piped, collected and piped, and come over here outside the buffer zone.
So what's there now? Is there a similar unit in place?
There's some leaching area, but I
Yeah,
don't even
just
think
around the
that.
pool,
just
the
around the
building
pool.
itself is
Yeah.
just downspout.
Yep. And that'll infiltrate downward?
Yes. Mhm.
Any enhanced conditions, or just meets state code for stormwater?
Well, I mean, it's, the Mass Stormwater Handbook is pretty restrictive standards in terms of design.
Yep.
So,
What do you think, Jim? Any more thoughts on this?
Well, yeah, I mean, I do see areas that are in the 50-foot buffer zone that probably aren't used for parking, like along the coastal dunes to the west side, along the Brick Road, and then some areas along the harbor entrance. There's not really that much, a lot of it actually is outside of the buffer zone, but,
The west side one, that is parking.
okay,
this
yeah.
brick road here is lawn parking on
Yeah.
either side of that.
Yeah.
So-
Well, yeah, we really have been very consistent with those regulations. I just don't see a good reason to not be in this case. It's the impacts are clear and the benefits of not fertilizing are very clear.
Well,
If I might suggest also, as you can, I agree with what you're saying. When you look at the project as a whole with the improved drainage and the stormwater, and in particular, lifting that entire building out of the flood zone, when you have a typical house project that's coming through, you're not gonna have usually that scale of benefit to other parts of your regulations. And so it's a balancing between, you're right, it may not be addressing as much the 0 to 50 on the existing lawns, not new lawns, but existing lawns, but you are getting, maybe that's something the commission can consider, the significant benefits of, by getting that building up out of the flood zone, plus the stormwater that Dave mentioned. There are, I think, some additional factors here that make this, again, it's not a regular house project, that can be considered.
Well, I think the project looks good. That's I'm really not supportive of it without enforcing those regulations. It's just something that we all have to, make these changes where, look at what's happening to the harbors and the sound and, it's clear.
Could you segment those conditions, Jim, to be specific areas in the 0 to 50, or are you interested in the 0 to 100?
Well, I think that they might have to propose some areas. I mean, it is a larger project, and the development's mainly focused in one area, so maybe it doesn't have to be the whole property, but I'd like to at least see some improvements here.
just say, I mean, absolutely support what Jim is saying. And from my point of view, there's an opportunity here for you guys to figure out a way to, and come up with a proposal to propose to us how to mitigate and address the problem that Jim is addressing. I mean, this is not a regular house project, you're right, but the scale of the impact that this facility has on the environment is way bigger than any single-family residence in town. It has a huge impact, and the lawns are very green, and I don't know what the square foot, I would guess there's at least an acre of lawn on the property as a whole, and to keep that lawn green, you are undoubtedly applying a fair amount of fertilizer and herbicide. And it would be great if you could make an example of your place by seeing how to plant natives, how to turn at least some of this into a more native habitat and do it in a way that's attractive and appealing to your clientele as well. That would be fabulous. And rather than force the point here, my suggestion is to give you guys a couple weeks, not in fact vote on this tonight. Put it off and give you a week, or give you at least a 2-week cycle or 4-week cycle to think about it and come back with some way to actually address the point, rather than forcing us to vote here now on it.
If I may be asked for your consideration, this is, the first step of a process. We're going to the Board of Appeals and the Planning Board as well. If, just as we're doing all the preparations, to have so many balls in the air, if the board, since we are filing that other application within a week or so, as we've agreed with you, on the beach part, if the board is otherwise in favor of the project, and I think the consensus is that overall you are for the project that's before you, would you consider voting to approve it tonight? And if you want to include a condition that the next application that comes through will do what you said, I wrote it down, investigate the opportunities for improving everything we're discussing. You'd be able to vote on tonight, that would then, we could come up with that application or that proposal in the application, and you could review it with the next order of conditions that we're seeking from you.
Is that application gonna be the one for the Tiki Bar? Or is,
Correct, that would be the next one.
yes,
correct?
I wanted to make sure it's not like an indefinite, we don't know when the next project is going
No,
to
no,
be.
no,
It's
it's
going to be,
Next couple weeks for the Tiki Bar.
it's going to be coming with the Tiki Bar and the mitigation that they're proposing.
And that would be part of the mitigation for that.
No, but it would cover that too.
Would we still want to condition this project to have some language that speaks to a significant reduction in fertilizer use, the 0 to 50?
I'd propose an alternative that would allow us to vote on it tonight, to either comply with the regulations, the no fertilizer chemical regulations, or a commission-approved alternative, which you could present at a future meeting.
Are you talking about just the 0 to 50?
The regulation
Our
is
regulations
the
cover the 100.
100, but you could propose whatever you think is
I think you
appropriate.
can hear there's some concern about us deviating from this regulation. Myself, I think traditional use of this property would not cause me to press too hard in the 50 to 100. There's been lawn in the 50 to 100 forever, or a long time anyways. So that's one way to think about it. But I do tend to agree that it would be unusual for us to have no, conditions that would seek to reduce nutrient loading for this property, given what we've been doing the past few years. Even though it's not directly related to what's proposed, so I can understand how you guys feel. But maybe you can come back, present what you're doing now. I'm sure you've got a plan on what you're applying, frequency, amounts, amounts of nitrogen per square footage, that type of thing, and then maybe come back with some ideas on how to reduce that.
Are we talking 0?
I think, our regulations allow us to impose 0 applications. I think in this case here, the 0 to 50 would be really important, and having some net reduction that was significant for the whole property. And I would understand your interest to want to keep some of these lawns the way they are.
Well, then we go, it goes back to the parking again.
Right, I can understand that. And so I think this is a different case, but I think having some significant reduction in nutrient loading would be really beneficial, I think for your interests as well. Do we want to give them the choice whether
Well,
to continue?
I think your wording would suffice in that it's either you comply with the regulations or you get a commission-approved alternative, which we can discuss at the upcoming meeting in a couple weeks. Does that sound okay to you?
Sure.
Okay. So I think if,
It's okay to go ahead and approve
Yes.
everything else with that.
yep, but, so we'll put the
Open-ended.
condition there that they have to have they either have to comply with what we have, or we have at the next meeting, you have a commission-approved alternative plan, which you'll present what you're doing now and what you're proposing to do to improve the situation.
Okay, there's really no other conditions, right?
Well, the standard, not, everything else is gonna be standard for
Okay.
floodplain.
Any comments from the audience? Seeing none, any further comments from the proponents, or any thoughts? From the commissioners? Okay, Jim, I think you might want to tackle this motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the notice of intent for Witchmere Harbor Real Estate proposed building and hardscape modifications with the condition that the property complies with Town of Harwich regulations that prohibit fertilizer chemical use in the 100-foot buffer zone to a resource, or come up with or get approval from the commission for an alternative to that at a future meeting.
Is it the town of Harwich or the conservation?
Conservation Commission.
Conservation
yeah.
Commission.
Yeah.
I'd just like to,
So we have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, so a little discussion. If you could add the language to that the alternative provided significant benefits to nutrient reductions, nutrient loading reductions.
Sure. A commission-approved alternative that would provide a significant nutrient loading reduction.
And you had one comment
Well,
on
no, you said the town of Harwich, I was just saying it's our commission's
Right.
regulations.
Okay. All right, any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Keep getting them on the fertilizer.
Well, yeah.
What do you got now?
I just felt like we do it to homeowners.
Yeah, can I have 3 of them?
No, I mean,
I really only need
I thought
3,
since they were doing
Yeah.
this major project, it ought to, even though they weren't
but thank you.
disturbing that area,
Just be more.
that fell under the
Yes.
condition.
Thank you.
I think it does, yeah, that's why.
So that's where I was, it's like, the other thing I didn't like, we were talking in generalities.
Okay, next on the agenda, we have a notice of intent for 47 Sequotum Road, proposal to remove an existing dock and install a new seasonal dock in the waters of Long Pond.
Maybe. Just think about things there. There's another one over there. Yeah. I don't know how functional it is, but it might suffice. Oh. Can you hang it from the top? Is it open? There you go. Thank you.
Good evening. For the record, Mark Burgess with Shorefront Consulting, representing England. You're seated beside me. So this is a very typical seasonal dock on Long Pond. You've seen lots of these kinds of applications. This one did pass Waterways. We were at Waterways on the 19th. And so it's an existing dock, so that's why I'm starting out with those pictures. Those pictures were taken in 1985. And there is a letter in the file from the neighbor that testifies that the dock's been there since the 70s or earlier when she was a child. So it's been there a while because how many people have been to the site? So when you look at it, you're like, is this a dock? Mm-hmm. But it definitely used to be that. So the purpose here is to remove all of that. Those poles go quite a ways out into the water. But remove all of that and then relocate the dock to what we think is a better location. So if you read the alternatives analysis, you'll know that there is a variance being requested because it's a pre-existing non-conforming dock. So we're making it we're making it conform better. The 65-foot setback can't be met because the two adjacent docks on either side, that's what the blue lines on the plan are for. The intersection of the circle is off the property. So we can meet one of them, but not both. So we picked one. And then I also looked at the site by saying there's a concentrated use right at the base of the stairs. And to me, it just made sense to keep the dock somewhere in that area. We could put it to the middle of the lot, and if that's what the commission feels is a better approach, that certainly can happen. It would be further away from the property line. I felt that, and the applicants felt that that area in the middle was already pretty well vegetated. There were some trees along the shoreline, and rather than disturb that, it was a better practice to just put it on the left side of where the beach area is now. That way, nothing has to be disturbed. When the logs are removed, a couple of thoughts there. If, again, at the commission's option, those logs kind of, they're part of the ground at this point until they get out in the water. We could just leave them there and just cut them where they enter the pond and remove that as debris. If they all come out, then of course some restoration has to be done there, but it's minor. So there'd be you'd have to fill in the holes and do some planting and things like that. So that was an option as well. I don't know if I put that in the narrative, but there's more than one way to skin a cat, so it really depends on just how much you want to remove. It's a standard aluminum dock. It's 50 feet, goes out 50 feet. We're allowed 80, and there's plenty of water. There's 3.5 feet of water, so we don't have to go out any further, and the applicants don't want to go out any further. It's approximately the same as the dock to the left, and it does stick out a little further than the dock to the right. So the dock would be 36 feet away from the adjacent dock to the right, and that's the dock that you received the letter from in the file. Other than that, it meets all the performance standards. It's minimal approach to gain the project goals, and I guess with that, I'll keep it simple and just open it to discussion.
Thank you. Amy, any summary comments for us?
I am going to recommend approval for it. But first, I'll just address kind of yes, there was a dock there prior, but in the past 20 or 30 years, its usable life has long since passed. So, and it was never, even because it was older potentially, or it was never actually a licensed dock. So I don't think necessarily, grandfathering it comes into place. So that leaves us to whether or not it meets today's performance standards. And I think with the exception of the 65-foot, which is setback from adjacent structures, which is mostly due to navigation, is why that's in there. And you got approval from the Waterways Committee for a variance for that, I think, in general, everything else meets the standards for this dock, except for that, which is really, again, a navigational issue and not so much a conservation issue, even though we do have jurisdiction over that bylaw. So I agree with the placement of the dock. I think if you went farther to the left, you would impact more native vegetation and potentially trees. So where you have it located now, the center line, there's really no vegetation that needs to come out. So I think it's the most benign location. It meets the standards in terms of length, width, depth at the end, seasonality. I do have to stay consistent with our regulations now for docks and piers that upland storage, I know it might be a little cumbersome, but upland storage in the off-season of the dock, landward of the top of the slope there, is something I am recommending. It's just we find that when docks get stored on the beach area there, and you really don't have that big of a beach, that in the event of winter storms and ice, it can actually create more damage to your toe of your slope than it's worth having there. So, and as far as, I would recommend that you remove the old posts that are out there. I think it would be very minimal amount of material that you'd have to bring in to kind of fill that hole that's above the high water mark. And you could accomplish replanting that with 2 or 3 wetland plants. It's such a small area. So, and I think that that would be a nice addition to restore that area and not have the additional structure. So with those conditions, I would recommend approval.
Thank you, Amy. Paula, do you want to start with any comments or questions?
Yeah, I was out there this afternoon with Amy and with John, and
Was the PVC pole still out in the water?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I'm amazed that's still there. It's so hard to get anything in.
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
I agree. I think the dock is a non-issue. I would like to see it stored upland, and I know that's gonna be very difficult because I know it's gonna be heavy. But it's something that really needs to be done.
The docks nowadays the decking usually just sort of plugs in. So by the time you remove the decking, the framework is 50, 60 pounds. And if you can take the legs off, it's even easier. So
People.
yeah, it's, I don't want to do it when I'm 80, but it can be done.
John?
Yeah, I agree. I don't have any comments. I can support this with the condition that the dock is stored upland.
Same here.
No comments on this.
Okay. I have just one question on the public access component. Is that required from chapter 91 for freshwater uses?
Yep, because it's a great pond, so
Yeah.
public access is required along the shoreline, whether it's fresh or salt.
I didn't realize that. Oh.
And they do allow, so I've had different envelopes of projects, so what I'm learning is that 12 to 15 feet landward is about as far as they'll let you come up and around, and that depends on topography too. So in this case, it doesn't make sense to have the stairs underwater when you could just hop up and around in this
Right.
much area.
It's interesting, because in tidal areas, you have area to move, and you know, at low tide, you can walk around. In ponds, you really don't have a lot of access, and so there's not a lot of room for people to walk anyways. So-
No, and the water level seems like it keeps getting higher out there, so there's no
Yeah.
there's no, it used to be, I guess, at some points, there was a beach around in front of the,
Right.
but I haven't seen that in years.
That, a couple wet years, it'll go down.
But
Any-
chapter 91 requires that, all fresh or salt.
Good to know.
Yep.
Any comments from the audience? None? Any further comments from the commissioners? Then let's entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the notice of intent for 47 Sequatum Road to remove the existing dock and install a new seasonal dock in the waters off Long Pond with the condition of storing the dock in the off-season upland on the upslope.
And Amy, do we need to specifically call out the variance?
What's the variance?
To the 65, the setback?
Oh, yes, you could, yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Yes. like 50-foot buffer, no. And grant the variance from the 65-foot setback to adjacent structures.
And the grant, the variance for the setback of
65
To adjacent
60-foot
structures.
setback.
Mhm.
65. Okay, seconded by John. All those in favor say aye.
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 None opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you. An easy one for a change.
Yeah, for a change.
That's what we say
Happy,
too.
Yeah.
Happy Fourth to everybody.
Same to you.
Be safe. Watch out for the doors. And thank you.
Okay, next we have a notice of intent for 27 Soundview. It's a proposal for construction of a single-family dwelling, including grading, driveway construction, installation of septic system, and underground utilities.
I will be right back. I need to grab something, but feel free and start.
Okay?
Just leave it right there, thank you.
So I am just handing out proposed elevation views of the building, and also Amy asked that I provide a breakdown of the coverage within the buffer zone, so. That's what I'm.
Thank you.
Good evening, I'm Stephanie Sequin with Ryder and Wilcox, and with me is Sarah Tarana Flores, and we are representing 27 Soundview LLC, who is has made has an accepted offer to purchase this property, so they're not the owner, but they are hoping to purchase this. It's a undeveloped piece of property on Soundview Road, a little over a half acre. There are built dwellings on either side of this property. It abuts Red River to the east, and a portion of the easterly part of the property is also salt marsh and within land subject to coastal storm flowage. The 100-year flood elevation, it's an A zone, and the flood elevation is 12. The slope at the flood zone is steeper than 4 to 1, so the top of the coastal bank was delineated as the point, or the points above the flood elevation where the slope becomes less than 4 to 1. So this plan shows the existing topography, the resource areas. We're showing the 50-foot buffer and the 100-foot buffer from the top of the coastal bank. And also because it abuts Red River, we also have the riverfront to deal with. So we're showing the 100-foot buffer from the river and the 200-foot riverfront boundary. The 200-foot riverfront boundary pretty much coincides with the 100-foot buffer, or is very close to the 100-foot buffer from the top of the coastal bank. So most of the property, with the exception of the very westerly portion abutting the street, is within either the 100-foot buffer to the coastal bank or the 200-foot riverfront boundary. What's being proposed here is, I think, a very modest project, the construction of a single-family dwelling with 1 bedroom, grading, hardscaping, and installation of a septic system. The dimensions of the building are 24 by 30, so 720 square feet. It's basically a 2-car garage with living space above. There's also a 2nd-story deck on the, I guess, easterly side facing the resource area. The closest, the deck is the closest structure to the resource area, and it's been positioned 60 feet from the top of the coastal bank per your regulations. We've shown a proposed septic system. It is, with the exception of the septic tank, outside of your jurisdiction. It's in about the only area outside of the various buffer zones where the system could be located. We're showing a limit of work and silt fence that are held pretty tight to the proposed structure. No disturbance is proposed within the 50-foot buffer zone. We're specifying gutters and downspouts, either gutters and downspouts connected to dry wells or crushed stone at the roof drip line to handle stormwater runoff from the building. The proposed driveway will be pervious, so again, we're handling the stormwater runoff there. As far as the performance standards for the riverfront area, this lot was created in 1954, so the performance standards for these pre-existing lots are that you may alter up to 5,000 square feet or 10% of the riverfront area. In this case, the 5,000 square feet is the limit. We're actually proposing only 3,140 square feet, and that's basically the square footage within between the limit of work and the riverfront boundary. So that's not 3,100 square feet of structure, it's just 3,100 square feet of work within the riverfront. We're maintaining a 100-foot undisturbed buffer to the river, and we are handling the stormwater runoff and controlling erosion and sedimentation through the use of the silt fence. So I believe we meet the performance standards for construction in the riverfront. And as far as mitigation, Amy asked that I provide a breakdown of the coverage within your buffer zone, and so I handed out that. I apologize, it's not in a nice, neat table, but as I said, the building square footage is 720 square feet. The deck and stairway are 144 square feet. We've also got a step and the pervious driveway that are all adding up to 1,261 square feet. And I was made aware that in order to comply with your new regulations, we do need to provide 2-to-1 mitigation for the 1,200 square feet of proposed coverage, which would mean a little over 2,500 square feet of mitigation. We had a lot of discussion about that today, trying to figure out how you provide mitigation on an undisturbed lot. We did speak with someone from Crawford Land Management who is doing work just down the street, and what they suggested there, it's mostly pitch pine and oak here. I think there's a lot of poison ivy, but
Yes.
otherwise not a lot of ground cover. So what they suggested is we could do plantings within the 0 to 50-foot buffer in between the existing trees and just provide an improved understory with some shady grasses and some understory shrubs. So we're certainly willing to provide that planting mitigation in the 0 to 50-foot buffer. Don't have specifics on the location or the plants, as we kind of got this last minute, but we can certainly provide that information to you, hopefully, maybe if you're willing to approve this project, subject to the receipt of that information. So I think that's all I have.
Thank you.
I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Sure. Amy, any comments?
So, this kind of brings up a good topic for discussion, I think. We had a couple other proposed for tonight that went off the agenda till next time, but since we've adopted the regulation in October for the, and that's why I went to grab my copy of the regs. The wording, several applicants have found it very hard to comply with that 2-to-1, and it says the commission shall require 2-to-1 mitigation, which is not may, or it comes down to semantics, but it's, we don't have, I don't think, very clear variance language, and I don't know if we could have really known this until we kind of hit on something that tried this regulation, if you will. So there's a bit of a concern that if a literal interpretation of the regs, which says you shall require 2-to-1 mitigation for disturbance in the 0 to 50, or sorry, disturbance in the 50 to 100, that on a lot of lots that have been assessed as buildable lots by the town, that a solid interpretation and potential denial of such projects would result potentially in a regulatory taking of the properties. So I have reached out to council and put in the legal request and been granted permission to use council to really dig deep into our regulations and make that determination of whether or not that regulation should be changed at all, so that we don't run the risk of regulatory takings. It does seem as if, you know, on a disturbed property that's had a house and a lawn for 100 years, you know, they have the opportunity to mitigate and give back, whereas a lot of times these virgin lots don't. So I'm not speaking for or against necessarily any specific project, but I just wanted to set the stage for that. So we do not have anything back from council as of yet on that. I did speak with both Stephanie and the owners, the Ayubs, today about it, and I really appreciate your starting to think of other ways that you could improve the buffer zone in terms of habitat and other things. There's it's a small lot. You've minimized, you've met our other regulations. You stayed outside the 60-foot no new build area. You've met the riverfront standards. You're well under the 5,000 square feet of disturbance. And in terms of, you didn't have to apply with natural heritage for this one, did you? Because that's farther down the bank where you're not working. I believe there is, the river itself, I think, is mapped. So you didn't have to do that.
What was, sorry to interrupt, but what was the reason for not going to natural heritage?
It's not mapped.
There's no map there.
It's not a mapped area.
So it's not a distance from the resource area, it's just not a mapped area.
The river itself, I believe, is mapped, but it's actually over 100 feet away from the river itself. It's just that the topography leads it to be a coastal bank farther up. But yeah, they did not have to apply. It's not a mapped area. Unless you're a mapped area, you do not need to apply with heritage. So, yeah. The maps did change a few years ago. I don't know if it was before. But I think other than discussion about how we can improve the site, which is a native site, and I've been to the site a few times over the past couple of years. And you're correct that it's primarily pitch pine, some oak. There is very little herbaceous or understory layer there, so I think especially in the 0 to 50 for habitat, that would be an improvement. Whether it's considered mitigation to the commission, that's up for your interpretation. I think they have minimized to the extent practicable. So with that, I will pass it on.
Okay. Paul, any thoughts?
No, I was out there today, didn't go into the property because it's loaded with poison ivy.
John?
But we could see everything.
Yes.
Yeah, so I understand Amy's point that we've sort of boxed ourselves in by not allowing for variances. But I don't know how tightly the word mitigate is defined in the regulations. And so we might be able to work with things in that way. So,
Could I, sorry.
Could I just address that point through the chair? Because I looked at the regulations with a view towards more meeting them as a performance standard rather than asking for variance, because there's certainly more than 2,500 square feet of area in the 0 to 50. It's a large swath of land that, as Amy indicated, it's got some invasive poison ivy. It doesn't have a lot of ground cover right now. There's a lot of opportunity to provide a vegetative management plan in that area that could include more native species, removal of the poison ivy. And your regulations actually do say, section 1.04 is the regulation that requires the 2-to-1 mitigation. And it says mitigation may be in the form of native plantings, comma, the seeding of shellfish, comma, or other commission-approved mitigation. I think in most instances you've been talking about swapping lawn or trying to get development out of areas and struggling when you have undeveloped areas. But I think where you have a situation where there's opportunity for planting native plantings, and that's in 3 of subsection 3 of 1.04, that language. You have an opportunity to really create a better habitat, as Amy indicated, but also a better environmentally beneficial buffer to the coastal bank. So coastal banks are significant to storm damage prevention and flood control, and the stability of those banks is super important. If we're actually planting a herbaceous ground cover layer with some shrub layers on top, those root systems will serve to stabilize that sediment and really serve to enhance those flood protection, storm damage prevention, and flood control interests that your bylaw seeks to protect. And in addition, obviously, the habitat values will increase as well because those native plants can provide overwintering and sheltering and food and shelter for habitat in the area. So where we have 2,500 square feet of area, and we're kind of focused in the 0 to 50 because that's obviously a much more beneficial area to put it, where our development is as close to the road as we can get it. This vegetation plan could go right up against the resource without going in it. It could provide a lot of environmental benefit, and I think actually comply with that purpose of the regulation and that provision where it says that mitigation may be in the form of native plantings.
So, all that being said, you are right that we have in the past been consistently viewing mitigation as returning previously disturbed areas to something approximating a natural state. And as Amy pointed out, that's not possible in previously undisturbed lots. And so I think for the commission to reconsider exactly how we do that requires a little bit of deliberation. It's not like an obvious and easy change to make, although I think it's worth talking about. I guess that's my take on it, for the reasons you're stating, but that's my point.
I think it will become site-specific when you're talking about whether native plantings are considered mitigation. We have other sites, and I'm not gonna name them, but other sites we've recently seen that are similar situation. You wanted to develop a previously undeveloped lot in the 50 to 100, and those properties have been densely, the past couple of them, one in particular, has been very densely vegetated with everything from ground covers to shrub layer to understory to canopy. I wouldn't consider, and on a property like that you should touch it at all. It was perfect. This area is very natural. It's a wooded upland. You do have a couple of invasives coming in, but it's nothing minor. But you are lacking a little bit of the various stories, if you will, of the tree, I can't even think of what it's called, what they're called, the layers. But there is a little bit of room for improvement here without disturbance, especially for things such as habitat, and it's a fairly stable bank, except towards the slope, but it gets steeper. But in terms of wildlife habitat, especially in a inner riparian zone, which is critical. I think there could be some benefit to that. How you quantitate it, I don't know. But I think in terms of what you were saying, John, about properties in their natural state or undeveloped state, I think some lend themselves more for augmentation and plantings than others, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think the goal here would be to enhance the environmental values of the site. So, and those values are articulated in section 101 of your regulations. And they include prevention of pollution, flood control, sedimentation control, erosion control, storm damage prevention, and wildlife habitat. So this would be enhancing all those values with the addition of native plantings. While there's native stuff and potentially not a lot of invasive, there could, poison ivy's certainly non-native if not invasive. Isn't it invasive? Poison
It's
ivy?
native invasive.
Native invasive? Okay.
Yeah, just like greenbrier.
Okay. But where you get an opportunity like this without a lot of ground cover to increase the amount of native vegetation with good habitat value, you can certainly increase those environmental values that I just listed and that are enumerated in section 1 of your purpose. So I think when you consider it that way and you tie it back to the language in your regulation that identifies native plantings as a form of mitigation, I think you can go away from the request for a variance and view it as if we provide 2,500 square feet of this mitigation vegetative planning, we can comply with that provision and not have to deal with a variance request.
Thank you. Stan, any comments?
Nothing at this point, no.
Jim?
Well, yeah, I'd be open to seeing a mitigation plan for the property. We haven't seen that, so I haven't studied it for that. You know, to me, the mitigation is at a 2-to-1 ratio, balancing out the adverse impacts of what's happened. So it'd be the equivalent of, you know, removing or restoring 2,500 square feet that was either a house, driveway, or lawn, you know, not or some severely degraded habitat. But if it's habitat that's in pretty nice shape, I don't necessarily see that as a balance. So, I mean, the property should not have adverse impacts, right? The project should not have adverse impacts on the property. It should be actually a benefit at a 2-to-1 ratio of, and we are allowed to consider any proposed mitigation plan, including any off-site option. And I know we've approved 2 in the past year with mitigation that happened off-site. One was restoration of hardscape and lawn, and the other was a conservation restriction on other buildable lots. So that's all stuff we're allowed to consider and approve.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with all these comments. I think our language, before it said shall, we applied a 2-to-1 for some time. Whether or not it was really institutionalized.
Right.
But we did apply it for some time. I think that it was case-specific, and it depended on the habitats that would be impacted. And then it became shall, and so I think we've been locked into that. So I think a plan that had those things that folks have talked about, as well as a vegetative buffer strip along the top of the 50, our regs allow for that, and that's not a very large amount of square footage, but that would be a really functional amount of vegetation, I think, at that point. That wouldn't eventually turn to lawn over time.
Yeah, essentially be a no-disturb zone, almost like a vegetative, like a fence, a living fence barrier
Right.
to keep
I know,
people
so
out
what
of
are
that area.
You're talking about between the 50 and the limit of work to,
Along that 50 border, even independent of this particular 2-to-1 reg, we've put in vegetative buffer strips before.
And I read that your regulations state for a new home on an undeveloped lot, the commission may also require a 5-foot vegetative buffer strip right at the 50.
Right.
So I think
With a lot of undisturbed lots, it's not necessary. In this case, it seems like you guys are looking for.
opportunity, sure, yep.
And that might be a functional strip in that case. And then, Yeah, and a lot to me comes down to performance standards, you know, will that square footage of house cause an impact to the resources that are below that we're supposed to protect? And if it was a much larger footprint, I would have concerns about that. So I think come back before us with a plan and we'll see where it goes. I had a question on the Zone AE. Is this lot conforming right now for size for that zoning? Is it a conforming lot size presently?
It's a pre-existing.
It's a pre-existing lot, right?
So it would be,
Does it have adequate buildable upland under current zoning? No.
right, so we'd need a variance under the,
No, because we're only at 5% of the lot area, total coverage, and that's unroofed coverage, so I think we're
That's-
well under the
that's
limitation.
the riverfront, but for other jurisdictions, would it need a variance for anything else?
A zoning variance, or?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, no.
No, okay.
Can I just, as a part of the LLC that's applying, there's a timing issue here that I'd like to appeal to the board about. We've spent a fair amount of time, obviously, putting this together, and we do have a contingency that would extended to complete this work. Is there an opportunity tonight to vote contingent upon providing the mitigation plan, because that will enable us to sort of move forward and continue to, you know, pursue this not only from a perspective of mitigation, but also, you know, in terms of keeping this deal alive.
Right. I'm gonna appeal to everyone's feelings. I would, for myself, I'd say no, because we don't have a plan before us. And so we'd be voting on something we know nothing about. It'd be unusual to vote without a plan before us. And given this type of disturbance, I think some of us still are considering performance standards and impacts to resources. So I think it's, you know, it's an undisturbed lot right now. Anyone feel otherwise, or feel like they'd like to move tonight?
The PNS due diligence period expires at this month, and then we have to wait for the permit thereafter. So I guess the concern was if and I don't know how a condition could be worded, but if it was contingent upon a plan that this commission approved, we could come back at any meeting for that approval. So we wouldn't get our building permit unless and until this commission could view that vegetation plan. I think that would help matters under the PNS agreement, since there's this timing element.
Right. So we're talking about continuing to July 17th. That's when we would ask you if you want to come back on the 17th. How does that work?
I don't know.
Well, I mean, you know, it may put this agreement at risk.
Yeah.
It's been really extended twice, and to try to, and you've seen we've made a real effort to lessen the impact, and
Right.
spent a lot of thought with regard to much of these matters. So it does put this at risk for us.
Right. And I appreciate all the effort that's gone into us. We have a pretty important question that we've put to town council on this topic. So I would like to hear back their response. And I would like to not deviate from our tradition of having a plan before us, a vegetative plan. This is you know, without the mitigation, in my mind, this is not a viable project, given it's an undisturbed lot. So I think it is pretty important. Just did it for Witchmere.
I think the comment was just made that for the Witchmere application, there was a vote contingent upon a condition.
Right.
Yeah, if you think about that, though, we basically made them comply with our
Right.
regulation 100% unless they came up with something down the line.
Right.
So that project is now restricted to our regulations.
So if the plan that we created were submitted, your next hearing is on July 17th, you're saying? Is there a particular time period in which this vegetation plan has to be filed before the 17th?
We typically like it a week ahead of time. We can make an exception, and literally, I mean, because we understand timing and we want to try to help you as much
Yeah.
as we can. Understand too, I mean, the other continuances you had to have to the PNS, this is the first time we've seen this in front of a hearing, so.
Right.
We're not trying to hold you up in any
Right.
way, but that wasn't on us. We could accept it as late as the Friday before.
I'm just, trying to continue to move things along. And again, in terms of,
We
I
just
don't,
need time to see it, yeah.
I don't know what the specific question was to town council. And as a former town council, I'm not going to get involved with what questions you ask. But I think that this plan obviates the need for any variance or talk about a denial of a variance. I think that with this plan, it would fully meet your regulations. That's my goal. So if we can get that in by Friday, I think it's...
Noon would be good if you could.
Is it the 12th? I think it's Friday.
Let me look. Just so I have a chance to get it to them prior to the weekend in their Dropbox.
It would be the 12th.
The 12th.
Okay.
Yeah, by noon would be good.
And we can get it electronically as well as in paper copy to help with the transmittal if that's helpful.
Yes,
I
that
don't
would
know
be
if you guys
wonderful.
email, yeah. Okay.
I just have one comment in regards to your comment, Brad, about the vegetated buffer strip. I don't think we'd be looking to have that at the 50-foot. We'd be looking to have that essentially at the limit of work for minimization.
Between the limit of work and 50.
Well, yeah, so, I mean, that would be part of the disturbance of the site, planning that densely. So it should be at the edge of the disturbance. That would essentially define the rest of the property as a no disturb zone.
Do our regs say 5 to 10?
It says, in certain instances, such as application for a new home on an undeveloped lot, and I'm reading from 104 subsection 1, the commission may also require establishment of a vegetated buffer strip of 5 feet in width in addition to the 50-foot no disturb zone between the development activity and the protected resource.
Right.
Yeah, it just has to be somewhere in
Yeah.
between, but we wouldn't want to see, we're
A
not
gap.
looking, we're
You're
not
talking
looking.
like in the middle of,
more in
I
order
see
to
what you're
put it
saying.
in.
It's at the
Yeah.
limit of work, not
I
at the
see.
50.
But the 55-foot undisturbed buffer already exists.
I mean, if you wanted to propose your limit of work at the 55-foot buffer, then that could.
Which it is.
Well, but a lot of it is well outside the 50-foot buffer. I mean, it's more like, it's one place it's approaching the 100-foot
Oh, yeah, up
buffer.
there.
So,
Right, so you're saying there's something wrong with providing more than 55 feet of undisturbed natural vegetation?
no, I'm saying, I just didn't want there to be any confusion that we'd be looking to have that planted at the 50-foot. We'd want it planted at the limit of work as shown on the plan.
Is that when you say a vegetative, I guess maybe we don't understand, a vegetated strip is actual purposeful vegetated strip, not leaving it alone?
Right, yeah,
That's the
it would be a
difference.
densely planted, dense native plantings to just kind of limit any activity from
I mean, I thought the
working.
whole reason for having the 60-foot building setback was so that you could ensure the 50-foot no disturb zone, and then that 10 extra feet gives you the extra 5-foot vegetated buffer beyond the 50-foot.
Sure, well, you're welcome to propose your limit of work wherever you'd like. But it should be, the buffer strip should be planted at the limit of work.
If I can interject, I think what's going on here is that we're trying to find means to reach that 2-to-1 mitigation. So the application of the vegetative buffer strip really wouldn't typically apply with a property like this. But I think in this case, we're looking to gain that 2-to-1. And so that would be a functional thing to have if you build up and enhance the vegetated buffer strip beyond what it is now. So I think we're looking for ways to make this.
And so
work.
additional plantings between the 50 and the limit of work. So starting from the limit of work and going toward the 50 can count toward the 2-to-1 mitigation?
I don't know if that, but they should be at the limit of work. The idea is, are you proposing that this is the limit of disturbance on the site, the limit of work?
Yes.
Or was there future lawn or anything? So
This is, correct me if I'm wrong, they can't disturb beyond the limit of work without coming
without
back to
permission,
you.
yeah.
Right, so this is
sometimes-
what we're proposing.
Right, so sometimes we like to see some relatively dense plantings along that, just to help prevent encroachment essentially that would naturally happen without those plantings. It's just something that helps to minimize impact.
That encroachment's really quite common. And so I think this might be a case where everyone's trying to find a way to mitigate to the, 2,500 square feet. That might be an area that was functional,
Yep.
provided benefits. And our regs do allow for that 5-foot strip, even though it really doesn't apply to undisturbed sites.
It says an undeveloped lot.
I mean, a lot like this, I think, I understand your point, Stephanie.
Maybe I'm being
Okay.
a lawyer, but.
No, you're doing a good job tonight. But I think it's a case, I feel like we're trying to find the ability to reach the 2-to-1. The commission doesn't want to relax that in this case, so is there a chance to find that? And to me, a beefed-up strip would enhance that and provide some functional benefit to reduce future encroachment.
Okay. So we can work with the landscaper in providing that plan. And so hopefully we won't have to wait for any town council opinion before the 17th. We can come in with a plan that meets everything, and you guys can review it and vote on that day.
Right.
Luckily, the landscapers aren't busy, so.
That's okay. And Amy, I think it'd be a good idea maybe to have them consult with you if necessary on approaches.
I'm happy to do that, yeah.
Yeah, I think that
I'm
might,
available.
because it's again, we have an undisturbed area, we're gonna provide mitigation in, so it's a little bit different. But just to relax that, I think it'd run counter to our regs, and I think our intentions in recent years of trying to mitigate for that disturbance.
And I would say I'm still not 100% that mitigation can happen on the site effective at a 2-to-1 ratio to balance the adverse impact. So it may have to be combined with off-site mitigation of some kind.
I think it helps that the house is only 700 square feet. And
About-
again, in zoning, where the lot coverage, I think, is, and maybe David can correct me if I'm wrong, but 15% in this zone, where we're at under 5%. That in and of itself, I think, is being sensitive to the ecological values on the site. So I hope that is also
I
considered.
think the minimization has been, accomplished as much as possible, essentially.
Right.
But the mitigation is supposed to balance.
On top of it, sure.
Balance that impact at a 2-to-1
2 to 1.
ratio. And it may, I haven't studied what could be done to restore, enhance the property and evaluate that against the adverse impacts, but on a pretty nice natural lot, it can be hard to realistically do that.
Well, hopefully with some understory and shrub layers, we can do that for you, as well as this vegetative strip.
So, okay to move
Yeah,
to
I
the
think-
17th
Yep.
of July? Okay.
Please.
I move that we continue this until July 17th. Second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, it's up to you. We do have Lover's Lane here next. We also have somebody here who's here for a very quick extension. I don't know if it's okay with the people here for Lover's Lane, if we quickly do an extension to get them out of the room. Do you mind just taking a couple minutes?
Is that Witchmere Estates?
Winchmere Estates extension. Yeah,
Is this related to, this is not related to what was before us last time?
no.
Yes, okay.
This is, sorry, it's Winchmere Harbor Club. So they're asking for an extension.
Mhm.
If you don't mind, just take 2 minutes to do this real quick so David can go home. And we'll get the other David out of here soon too, hopefully. They want a 3-year extension. I put it in my summaries. And correct me if I'm wrong. So they're trying to address the structural options to the piling support system that they have there. And this is a dredging project. So because of some structural issues, they've been unable to do the dredging. And this is their first request for an extension, especially if there's structural issues that are below mean high water. If you have to address those with all the other entities, it could take a long time. So I'm not recommending a 1-year like we would typically for a lot of things. I am recommending a 3-year for them.
Okay, any,
Did I get all that right?
Yes. Can you remind me a little bit more about the project? In terms of, maybe if you have a quick,
With maintenance dredging,
yeah.
Can't remember the exact dredge footprint, David. It's pretty, wasn't it pretty small?
And I gotta be honest with you, I'm covering for Don Monroe. who
Just give me a
wouldn't be
second here.
Except he had a conflict.
Mhm.
and I
Give
was
me a
gonna be
minute
here.
here. Give me a minute to find the location. That's not the, that's the,
If it's a really
Opposed.
small project, I'm not sure if 3 years, is a good approach.
It's just that because we have to do a structural evaluation, it's gonna take a time to find what that solution's gonna be or what the thing is, what it's gonna take. And then there's only certain times you can do dredging.
Right.
So I think we would like to have more than 1 year.
1 year's not
'Cause
enough.
it's gonna take a while to
Yep.
figure things out structurally.
just trying to find the, I have the dredge footprint, but I was looking for the cubic yardage. It's really the channel. Should have had that for you, sorry.
I'm just curious, the dredging projects can have a twist now and then.
Yeah, it was from here to here. I'm looking for the, so it is in front of your bulkhead outside of our main channel. I was just looking for the cubic yardage.
It looks tiny, really.
It's not big.
Yeah. And the revetment has been constructed?
That's been there for a
Yeah,
long time.
It's been there for a long time.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, how do folks feel about 3 years? That's kind of like a maximum extension.
I was gonna tell a one-time 3-year, and if for some reason it goes longer than that, it's a new NOI.
Okay.
I think that would be a fair condition, certainly.
Any other
That
comments?
should give them plenty of time to get things worked out.
So this is, the permit is to do dredging, and the issue is that the piling supporting the decks and structures are not structurally sound,
Correct.
Potentially, yeah.
but are needed.
I mean, they're being looked at, and then structural solutions are gonna have to be.
The only reason I ask, I bring it up, because sometimes I worry that the intention of, the original order is lost as the years click on.
Right.
And we can quickly give an extension. In some cases, it probably should have more scrutiny. This case doesn't really seem to be that way, but
This one has pretty strict time of year restrictions, depths, of working with heights, complying with all the other, this one's pretty solid.
is there any shellfish mitigation?
There's no mitigation, because this is a historically dredged area.
Yeah.
But they are to work with heights so that shellfish can be harvested, and either harvested or moved
Yeah.
prior.
Okay. Well, any further thoughts?
So I just have a question. If you're concerned about the condition of the pilings and revetment there next to the area to be dredged, there may need to be repairs made to that, and if so, is that part of the
An
permit?
amendment, it would be an amendment. There is no permit that allows for anything structural here, so it would be an amendment or a new filing.
So
if that came to be the
it's
case.
not just dredging, you have to
Correct.
go through another,
Yes,
Yes,
and
oh,
so,
absolutely.
and that's part of the need for a 3-year extension, I see, okay.
yeah.
And this one came with an as-built originally?
Yes, there is an as-built requirement, yep.
All right, no objections to Amy's recommendations? And I move we approve the extensions for 3 years with the understanding that if it's not completed, then it would be a resubmittal, a notice of intent.
I'll second it.
Seconded by Stan, all those in favor say
Aye.
aye.
Please sign.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Okay. Thank you. You want me to introduce this briefly?
Please.
Is that okay? David Little from Ryder Wilcox and Phil Cheney, landscape architect, are here to talk to us about a plan they've put together for 61 Lovers Lane. To give the commission a little backstory, in January of this year, it came to our attention in the Conservation Department that activity had been taking place on this property, which a few years ago, the commission finally, voted to issue a permit to build a house on the property. And there was kind of a very strict 50-foot no disturb zone established with vegetated buffer strip. The property, to my knowledge, changed hands, and the conditions go with the property, not with the owner. So the current owner, I believe, had what I counted on site back then, about 7 mature trees that were removed, as well as potentially some of the understory that had been planted as part of a buffer strip for the house. So and they also had started to bring in fill up closer to the road within the 50 to 100 foot area in particular. So this was stopped, the work was stopped when the fill started going in. Unfortunately, the trees had already been removed. We issued a cease and desist. It did stop, and the owner did pay a $600 fine, one for the addition of fill and for $300 and $300 for the trees. Part of the condition was that they submit a revegetation plan to the Conservation Commission. I know the owner's not here right now. I did express to her when she came into the office, about it. Ideally, would have loved to have planted this spring, and you and I spoke about it too. I know that you're extremely busy as well. So unfortunately, the plans are coming to us now, which means hopefully a fall planting. So something that we discussed, David, myself, and Phil on site is, when you take trees down, you need to replace with trees. And I think that they've come up with a plan that will enhance the 0 to 50 foot buffer. My only recommendation is that the area in the 50 foot buffer, as you look at the plan, there's a bit of a gap right outside the 50 in this area here, that we continue to fill that in, and make it a true 50 foot no disturb zone. So using like plants that you've already had on the plan to fill that in. So anything else you guys have to add?
No, we were helping out not the applicant, but helping out Andrea Bessie to come up with a plan that would satisfy the commission based on the violation that occurred. So we're more or less here to hear your direction of how you would like this plan changed, and we'll obviously move forward with that, and that's really, I don't really have anything to add.
Okay, thanks. We'll go around the table. Paula, do you want to start?
No, not right now.
Okay, John?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know, I was at the site briefly today. So I have a question, which is, Amy, you stated a tree for a tree. There are 4 trees here in the proposal, 4 red maples. I don't know that you would consider service berries as...
They are considered a tree.
They are, okay.
Yep,
So
and
there are 7 trees
there are.
in the plan, okay.
I also did look to, when we met initially on the site about this, is there is still a fair amount of canopy there with large oaks. So I think if you were to densely replant with oaks, which are hard to do anyways, you wouldn't be able to get the species diversity and be able to plant some of the shrubs that you're proposing. They just wouldn't do well. So if, it was partially my opinion, so correct me if I'm wrong, if you feel differently. I thought added species diversity with some large trees, the maples, and then the serviceberry, with all the other shrubs would better suit our interests here.
So how are the maples gonna do under all those big oaks?
The maples will do okay. It's a wetter condition down there within the 0 to 50, and they don't get as big. So, I mean, well, they can, but I think there's enough space.
Yeah, and there's a number of the red maples growing in the area already, and that's one of the reasons I chose them.
They
is
like
it's
it.
replicating what's there, and they can handle it there, yeah. And they're generally gonna be, a little bit shorter under the canopy, but they'll grow. That's also why we included the serviceberry, because it's an understory tree that will grow
Yep.
and reach some decent size under the canopy, and
Mm-hmm.
that's why it made sense. And it offers good habitat, good food as well.
I did have one question. When we were there this afternoon, we noticed that some of the stumps are resprouting. Are those going to be staying?
I would assume that we would need to leave them alone,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that we're not gonna grind them out,
Not
or,
going to grind
you
them.
know.
It's not-
And if you would like to see them managed, so
They
I
become
think a
actual
stump could be
trees.
managed, so you
Yeah.
create one,
Leader.
we're fine with
Yes.
that.
Okay.
Sorry, real quick, just to add on, when we were on the site today, I mean, the last time I've really been there is months ago when it was bare. So, just to let the commission know too, the plantings may have to change a little bit, because obviously we don't wanna take out, there's nice sweet pepper bush that's growing in there. You're not gonna take that out in order to put these in,
Right.
so,
Yeah, the assumption is that, nothing here would replace existing vegetation.
Right.
Just work in amongst that there.
yeah, but it
And
is
if that's
starting
the
to
case,
come back.
we can shuffle a little bit forward too. If it's
Right.
growing in pretty well in there, then that would make more sense, you know.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want the Gulf area to go to waste
Right.
underneath of it. It's coming up aggressively.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I think you made the statement, Amy, that really this should be filled in and planted right up to the 50-foot.
Yeah, in the area between the majority of the plantings and the 50-foot line, I think you could get another row or two in there.
But
And make that the true living fence, that it was really a 250-foot no disturb like it was supposed to be with the original house. As you go farther to the northeast along the 50-foot line, that area wasn't touched, so that area wouldn't be included in that.
But how about to the west there, where there's a couple of stumps
Stumps.
indicated?
Yeah, it
and
would
there's
carry
no-
over there,
There's no
so,
planting proposed there. Those are stumps from the cutting in question, is that
Yes.
correct?
yes, those were smaller ones. It was hard to because there were only
I see.
a couple of them were, most of them were full-size trees, those were smaller. But yes, where the existing edge of vegetation shows on your plan between there and the 50-foot buffer.
And you can see
Should
by the
be
scale there, that's roughly a row of shrubs,
planted.
and
Right.
that sounds
That should be
reasonable.
planted up.
Yep.
Good catch.
All set, Stan?
I'm all set.
Okay, Jim?
So this should probably be conditioned to be planted this fall, I would
Yes.
say, right? Make that a condition.
Absolutely.
And I would agree, the planting should be done similar to as the drawing, but to the 50-foot buffer.
So we could have, if we could have a revision
Sure.
within a couple weeks to reflect
I
that,
can
that
do
would be
that.
great.
Not a problem.
In the order of conditions, they already have a no fertilizer order.
Let me look.
As a violation, is that something that,
I'd have to think about,
so you can actually require more than what was disturbed?
right. Let me see what the writing was. This was in 2015
I don't know if you remember, but I
that the
think
amendment.
there was a foundation here for many,
Right,
many
20 years.
I can remember driving by the site and just wondering what the
Yeah.
heck was going on. For what it's worth.
Yeah, no, it was there forever.
Yeah, no fertilizers, herbicides, or permanent underground irrigation shall be used within the wetland or 100-foot buffer zone.
Okay.
It's here.
Maybe just for the, will there essentially be an order or a,
It's gonna be a letter, essentially, to close this out.
and then how about monitoring of this over?
Plantings,
There,
you can condition that. I think what it'll end up being, because it's gonna be conditioned, I think we'll reissue the enforcement order, and that way I can put the conditions in the enforcement order. That way it's just another way of documenting it.
And
I
we'll
guess.
still have to come back for a certificate of compliance for the orders anyway, so
I'm
you
gonna
you
keep
will
it
have
all
a
part of
second,
this
a second
file,
bite at
so
the
we
apple.
don't lose anything. It's all gonna be part of this file. It's
I'd like to see some monitoring at least,
a couple growing seasons.
yeah, maybe twice a year for 2 years.
Okay.
Just to make sure it
Mhm.
happens, and maybe check on the fertilizer issue as well. I didn't make it out there, so I didn't see if that was an
I
issue.
should check the front yard. I mean, most of the property is within the 100-foot,
Right,
except for like a little V.
yeah, pretty
Yeah.
much all of it.
Is 2 years typical, Amy? Do we often ask for 3?
I think in this instance, it's a fairly small area of planting. I think 2's okay. I think we're gonna know after 2 years, which is 4 growing seasons, whether or not plants are gonna make it.
So written report
Yeah.
for 2 years.
Is that from Phil, the designer?
However you wanna figure out who's doing it.
Nice.
Their landscaper, I mean, I
Okay.
don't want it to get lost in
Nope,
translation.
that's fine.
It's gonna be up to her,
Right.
the owner, to figure out who's gonna be doing it, but
We'd
it's
want
gotta come in.
Photographs, I would assume. but-
Yeah, so I usually have it accepted electronically. It's with photographs and detail of, well, first of all the planting should be done this fall. But status, if they had to replace anything, we'll probably put an 85 to 90% survival rate on things, understanding that you're gonna get a couple probably that don't make it. But yeah, it will be up to the owner to make sure whoever she has does it.
Okay.
Did we discuss previously a fence or any boundary?
We did, we had the living fence, and that was part of what came down. So, the 50-foot no disturb zone shall remain untouched. In addition, a row of native tree and shrub plantings shall be placed just landward to create a living fence. They shall be planted 5 to 6 feet on center, just landward of the 50-foot buffer, so in essence, a 55-foot. Approximately 25 shrubs are to be planted. Those were done.
They're there now. No, all
So-
gone.
I don't know if they're all gone, but
So I guess we should amend what I was saying earlier to match what the order of conditions was, that it's planted essentially to 55 feet.
yeah, I'll say the 50-foot with the row. All right, so
Or
that changed
50
things.
55, I mean, that
Okay.
makes it easy.
Yeah.
If that's what it said, we're,
Yeah.
It says 50-foot with an additional row, which really is 55.
Okay.
Let's call it 55.
Right, 55 foot.
Okay,
All right, so we need to approve this plan?
yeah, if you trust me to work with Phil and David to make sure that the changes, say, within 2 to 3 weeks,
Oh, yeah.
can be in to me, and that way the owner can then hire somebody to do the work in the fall. September, or October.
I'll work all day on the 4th.
Don't do that.
thank you very much.
Okay, sounds good. So,
Yeah. Technically, we should approve it.
okay.
You wanna vote?
All right, then I move that we approve this vegetation plan as part of the enforcement order.
I'll second it.
Second that, all those in favor say aye.
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 Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for waiting.
Happy Fourth.
Thank you.
Happy
Happy
Fourth.
Fourth.
I will comment as well, too, that I would love to see some adjustment to the mitigation policy so that pristine lots aren't penalized for being good stewards of their land, whereas a lot that's degraded badly can get anything approved easily because they can just go in and fix everything. That's been done over the last 30 years, and I see someone who takes care of a good lot, and it's like, oh, wow, you can't do anything because there's no mitigation, there's no room for mitigation.
Yeah.
But someone who's abused a lot or mowed and continually cut stuff, little bits over the years. Oh, they want to put in this, put in that, no problem. You share 500 square feet of mitigation, you pass easily. You're like rewarding someone for bad behavior.
That's why we have to-
Penalizing someone for good behavior.
It's an imbalance, but at the same time, you've also got disturbance in the 50 to 100 that will impact resources.
Oh, yeah, agreed,
So,
agreed.
you know,
I say, but like you say, you start getting into some taking issues if you're saying like, wow, you can't do it unless you mitigate, or at least find a better way to define the mitigation there, because there's
Yeah, I
some,
think-
you know, I've been on some properties where I look and say like, I wouldn't know where to plant a thing. It's
You
perfect.
don't wanna
and-
touch it, yeah.
Yeah.
And
I say,
upset the balance, you don't
Right.
wanna upset the
You
balance.
know, and yeah, you go in there doing anything. I mean, anytime you're disturbing, even to plant something good, you're upsetting what's there already. So I think I'd love to see that, some flexibility. Or again, some of those properties are taken care of well, and they get penalized. Yeah, they can't do anything, whereas
I don't think that's
the
not the
opposite. So that's-
intention.
Yeah,
That's
it's
my
just-
concern,
it's
as
just-
I've run into that before.
Yeah,
where,
balancing the impact.
You know, that's
It's
just
tough.
that mindset.
Right.
So, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, take
Bye-bye.
care.
See you guys.
Bye. 141 Riverside, they would like to come in on the 17th. This is a violation. So I don't see any harm in them not coming tonight. They received an admin review to remove a couple trees at the 200-foot riverfront line. They did remove those and more. They have an existing stop work enforcement on them. And I actually need to go check on that, to see if they are complying with that. We won't go into that. So we won't be hearing from them tonight.
Okay.
And then, we've got a couple of orders. I'm sorry, we don't have any minutes.
Yeah.
Nikki and I are working diligently on those.
Amy, before we do the orders, can we, in the spirit of talking about violations,
Oh.
can we talk about that property at the end of Uncle Vini's at Red River Beach?
Yep.
I feel like, did you get any intel on that situation?
Yes, I did. Well, a couple of those. So both that one, the second house from the end, the original contractor, who also proposed a very nice plan that we approved, is no longer on the job
Okay.
for reasons I'm not sure of. So irrigation has gone in, irrigation will be coming out.
Yep.
The plantings that were installed are not looking too well. They're gonna have to be replanted. We'll have it on a future agenda to see if you wanted to issue any fines for the installation of the irrigation system. It's all in the 50.
Right, I think I'd like to issue a fine
If you
tonight.
want me to just do it.
I mean, there was pellets all around for fertilizer, you know, and any encroachment on that footprint into the marsh a little bit, it
No.
looked like it was real, you know, close.
Yeah, it was real close to begin with. I did not see that.
Yep,
I did I looked around pretty well with the foundation. They didn't do as many plantings as they were supposed to. My guess is, again, it wasn't the same contractor that we
Yeah.
approved. We did not I have to see if we put the condition, I'll have it here in front of me.
yeah,
If we put the condition that if it was a different contractor, that it has to be approved by the Conservation Commission. I don't know if that condition was on that permit.
yeah.
We've been better about putting that on for,
Yeah. I think it's a classic example of, you know, we put these restrictions in, and then in a very short period of time, things don't go that way. And I think it's really,
it's 21 Uncle Vini's.
yeah, fairly egregious to see that happen. And it wasn't, you know, a project free of contention.
No.
I didn't support the use of patio and staircase into building footprint. So there were a
Right.
couple things done that I think we allowed them to take some liberties in the 0 to 50, so. But independent of that, I feel that just standing alone for the fertilizer use in the irrigation system, we should find them tonight.
Which house is that the one that was torn down and rebuilt?
Yeah,
Second to the end.
second to the end on the left.
Right, okay.
Yep.
Would it be appropriate to fine separately 300 for the fertilization, 300 for the irrigation?
Yes.
That'd be my intention.
Yeah,
And-
that would make sense to me.
And any other thoughts? You know, it's, we don't know really about the contractor issue, but it's the property owner's responsibility to follow the order.
Right.
So that's my thought, is to have those two fines.
While we're on that topic, we can vote on it all together. The other property on Uncle Vini's Road that has been in front of us, I was just gonna do this anyways. with your blessing, is the property that had started erecting the fence right up to the river,
Oh, boy.
was told to remove it. They did pay their initial fine, was
Yep.
told to remove it, it's not out, it's been months.
Okay.
So I was going to, on your behalf, do it again, fine them again,
Find 'em again.
and give them a deadline,
Give them a deadline, yeah.
which I think I did last time, but
Yeah.
Could we give them a deadline with a, can they do the $300 a day if it's not done by
Yes.
the deadline? That's
Yes.
a typical.
I'm gonna give them, because the fence company's gotta take it out,
Give
probably give
them
them a month.
or so, yeah. But maybe have that fine start accruing at that
Yes.
day to make it enforceable.
Any mitigation associated with that to prevent them from encroaching? I'm sure they've encroached right to the fence. You know,
They left the trees up, they snaked it through.
huh. For the dog, was it a dog fence?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. All right then, that's, okay, well then I'll go ahead and make a motion that we find, what's the number?
It's 21.
21 on Convenience Road for violations to the order of conditions of no fertilizer use in the 0 to 50, as well as no irrigation system in the 0 to 50, I think, as well, right?
Yes.
Second that.
Second that by Jim. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay.
Thank you.
And the other one, do we need to vote on, or?
No, I don't have the address, I was going to do it, you will have it on an upcoming agenda.
Okay.
Thanks for keeping an eye on that, Amy.
Well, trying. There's a couple other outstanding ones we're trying to
Can I-
corral in.
Can I ask a question on another property?
Mhm.
The one.
If you want me to look into something, sure.
Well, no, our friend, Mr. Saffron, was that planting
It
done?
was planted.
Okay.
It was planted a week before the end of June.
Wow.
And when I went to visit it, he had 3 little bunnies eating their hearts out. And I did tell him, I said,
New plants?
yep. He saw it too, he was livid about it, because, I mean, they literally they were baby bunnies, so they had eaten about this much off the bottom. All the plants, and I'm like, ugh. But he did do it. I had recommended to him that he put up some chicken wire around that entire area, because the plants looked like if they were just left alone, they'd be fine after a few seasons, but yeah.
Rabbit scram.
Yeah, so,
They ate the flowers of all my lilies. They were beautiful. This morning, there was not a lily in the garden.
Your lilies actually grow, mine get about this high and then they're gone.
Yeah,
I,
they had beautiful, beautiful flowers on them, and they're gone.
I have a plot in the community gardens, and I have one of the raised beds that didn't get taken, so I'm like, I'll plant it, I'll use it this year, and if somebody else wants it next year. It's about this high. So I have overflow from my garden. I had about 6 tomatoes, 6 peppers, and eggplant in there. The deer literally chomped them. They have stubs like this, that's it.
Oh.
That's all that's left, they're not coming back.
Amy. Oh, my God.
It's terrible.
Did they, any fence or just it was raised, so you didn't think they needed a fence?
Well, I should have, it's raised, but it's not obvious, I didn't even think about the deer, honestly. I thought about the bunnies, I didn't think about the deer, and there's so many deer down there.
They got me last year, and it was, they didn't take everything, but they just came over the fence
Yeah,
and took tomato plants that were a month and a half into the season and just brought them almost down.
yep. I'm lucky that these were just plants that I had too many plants for my home garden, because I have a garden at home that's fenced in, and those are doing fine, but this was just excess that I lost all of.
And we have patio tomatoes,
Yeah.
and yesterday we watched a chipmunk eat our big tomato.
That's
Anyway.
more- that's-
Sorry, Caleb, we're moving.
Could we?
Do some orders we gotta do.
Oh, we got some orders.
Yeah, and then I
Could
have
we
an
discuss the off-site mitigation? at
yeah.
some point?
Jim found Ipswich has a policy. I have not read it yet, but I'll pass this out. But we should,
I've actually been researching about a year off and on, because I kind of saw this coming, and a lot of towns have pretty effective off-site mitigation policies, as well as the state of Massachusetts, when towns don't have commissions to regulate things.
Thanks, Jim, I'll definitely read it. I haven't favored the state's regs. I think it you know,
But
can allow real impacts to occur on a property and then the off-site.
No, I agree. This is a pretty strict one in that when the mitigation cannot happen on the applicant's site, it actually, their ratio gets increased from 1.5 to 1, or 1.5 to 1 to 3 to 1. So they double their mitigation ratio. They list a number of different possibilities, such as restoring other pieces of land, conservation restrictions on other pieces of land, similar to what we have approved in the past year.
I like the idea of a policy, though. That
Yeah.
gives the applicant a much
Yep.
clearer.
This is, this is a pretty small document here, and a lot of towns have similar things. There's just not, even with what the applicant was proposing earlier, that it's not really mitigating the adverse impact. I
Right.
mean, it's some benefit. And some towns, even Barnstable, as a consultant said last time,
Yep.
they also have a financial option, which I think is somewhat viable.
We'd have to establish
Figure,
that. town meeting, yeah.
figure out what it realistically costs to restore square feet of land from hardscape to native pristine buffer zone, and come up with a number for that. And that doesn't mean we have to take any of those things. It just gives people options that are there, so they're not just sitting there like saying like, where can we plant a shrub on this property to mitigate? Because that does not
Need to provide
really
options.
mitigate anything, as far as impacts go.
Thank you for looking into that.
It also occurred to me that I wonder if MACC might be
Yeah, I
pretty
saw that,
helpful, because I'm not sure, I've never dealt with them, but I know a number of commissions have these in place, and some of them have probably been tested in court and whatnot, so.
Yep. I'll reach out.
I feel like we have a hard time because they're just like, well, what do we do? And we don't have, we say, well, you could propose something, and our regulations do allow people to propose anything and us to consider it.
Right.
And that's what happened and went well in the previous two projects. It kind of seems like this property that came before us today was probably related to another property. And that probably, that other property probably has real opportunities for real mitigation.
Yeah, I did speak offline with the owners, and that may be coming.
I gathered through the nature of the structure that it's not going to be a standalone thing, so that the owners have other properties that they could potentially mitigate on, whether they might not want to, but.
Yeah, right. Actually, it was them who mentioned that, actually.
Yeah, no, I
That
think
was a good
that's a really viable option.
I don't know why it didn't really come up tonight, but I wasn't.
Remove.
I thought it would, but didn't.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Remove hardscape, remove lawn, and restore it, and then we actually had a positive impact rather than a negative impact.
Yep.
At a 2-to-1 ratio.
Yep.
So.
Okay.
Thank you.
Which one do you want to start with?
Whatever one you like. I may need help on the 8 Monument one. I feel like I left something out, but. You wanna do that one first?
Sure.
There was just a lot of moving pieces to this one. I'm not sure if I like the wording I did. Oh, what I wasn't so this was on the, remember I forgot to hit the record button last meeting? Until like halfway through the meeting, so this was before I hit the button, so it's not recorded. I had my notes, but did we settle on a single split rail fence? A single rail?
No, we settled on
Boulders?
The rocks.
two-man stones spaced 20 feet on
Alright,
center.
I will change that. We went back and forth so many times, I forget.
Right.
2-man stones, roughly 20 feet apart.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think they were replaced on the 60-foot buffer zone.
Okay.
You remember the planting plan goes to 60 feet, not.
Right.
So they were to be placed at the 60-foot zone.
You're right.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Does the 55-foot apply to the irrigation?
That's what I was wondering. I could
Yeah.
have sworn the 55, I had it in my notes, in my written notes, that it was existing in-ground irrigation farther than 55 can stay. So there's a little inconsistency there.
Well, if it's in your notes, yeah, that's,
I mean, I think, the nature of the planting plan and the two-man stones, they'd be putting sprinklers in the woods essentially. If
Right.
they're at 55 feet.
Mm-hmm,
So,
they're already there now, right?
yeah.
well, they probably, they probably naturally would remove them, but it doesn't make any sense to have them. They would
It
essentially.
doesn't, but should we directly state that it should be at 60, no closer than 60?
Yeah, that's where you go with the minutes, that's tough, because I don't remember.
I had it in my notes at 55, so.
Well, we have everything at 55. in
Yeah.
there. Okay. Well, we could check the plan. If the plan
Yeah.
goes to 60, I think it was meant to be at
Yeah.
60.
I would
I
say check
recall
plan.
it being at 60.
I have it right here.
I don't remember it for sure.
Plantings go to 55,
All right, it may have just been at 55. I don't.
because we had said the 50, and then we wanted an additional 5-foot buffer strip.
Yeah. So I guess everything was at the 55. then.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's the only real change I see is for number 5.
All right, I'll fix that.
And then for number 6, there was no annual report, just a confirmation after 2
Oh,
years.
no, we should do that.
I don't think it was necessarily talked about. This probably would have been a good one to have this planting done. It almost occurred to me to require them to do it before
The building?
building, because why not?
Yeah, it's not in their way,
It's not related.
but we didn't tell them they had
We
to do that.
didn't, no, might have been a good condition to consider though.
One thing that's been a typical condition we can add is that the plantings must be accomplished the same or next growing season as the structure.
Yeah,
That's a typical condition, that didn't make it in here.
okay.
Okay. I knew I forgot things.
Well, I move that we approve the order of conditions for 8 Monument Way.
Second?
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion
All right,
carries.
please sign.
On
Oh,
to
wait a minute, actually, let me.
condition for 3 Squid Road. That's a good monitoring plan, number 8, I like that.
Especially because it was a violation.
Right.
And it's a fairly large area. I think
Yep.
we need it.
A substantial violation.
Yeah.
And then again, number 7, I'm putting it in, if anybody else other than Blue Flax is
Yeah.
gonna do the work, they need to get it passed by us, because
Yep.
we see what happens when
Oh, yeah,
another party comes in and maybe doesn't get the permit or can't do the work as well.
right. When there's work to do, you might not spend the time to read the order. I have no comments on the special conditions.
Yeah, no comment. Yeah, I'll make a motion to approve the order of conditions for 3 Skinnequit Road.
Second it.
Seconded by Stan. All those in favor say aye.
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 Motion carries unanimously.
You have a few sets of minutes next time.
Okay.
Um,
Amy, I keep getting these things that remind me of things. Uncle Vini's now at Skinnequit. The Skinnequit Boathouse at the outlet.
Yes,
Did you get a chance to look
I
at that?
did.
Yeah. And was
it is in compliance.
conforming?
I got the as-built. It is conforming. They did, we allowed them to do, I think what was hard was, it was so engulfed in vegetation. It was really hard to see the size that it actually was, but the measurements come out. The one thing they have to do is they may have had one fewer flood vent than they needed, so they're gonna put that in. But they should be coming back to us shortly for a certificate of, they should be coming to us for a certificate of compliance soon.
How's the vegetation look around it? Is
It's
it,
growing back great. I mean, because they had done some pruning
Yeah.
just to get around the structure, because they have some pretty big beams underneath. But it's coming back great. They have a little bit of erosion, and I had recommended, 'cause they had tried to seed it, right, and I said around the drip line, there really should be some native stone, and that they should have tried to mat it and seed it.
Oh, yeah.
This was on the side that was lawn to begin with, not on the other side. So they had some erosion issues, but it's kind of an unforeseen issue there. So they're gonna fix that. The contractor was good.
Okay. Yeah,
The size was right, I measured it.
The house looks bigger, and so I wasn't sure if we allowed them to take patio or, decking and convert that into house. It's, yeah, it's interesting. I like the fact it's elevated. It's raised up off the water, which is good.
Yep.
Okay, thank you for checking on that.
Yeah, no problem. No problem to go down there.
Yeah.
Nice spot. The One Cape Conference, I got the dates wrong. Well, not the week, but One Cape Conference is gonna be at the Wacquasit this year. It is a natural resources and economic conference, which really tie together here on Cape Cod, our economy and the natural resources that we have here. So it's gonna be on Monday, July 29th, and Tuesday, the 30th. They have not set who's speaking when. I don't know. One day tends to be more ecologically based and the other one more economically based. Problem is last year they booked everything and there was no room. So if you want to go, if you're interested, we will pay for you. It's $45 a day. And unfortunately, I just can't tell you what day is what.
Right.
I know that I didn't go to the economic one last year, but I heard it was very good anyways. But if you are interested in going at all, I'd recommend letting me know, because I'll reserve your spot for you. I wish I knew which day was what.
Are they having any tables or posters?
I can ask. It's very, the website is it gives you a basic bare bones structure of what the day is gonna look like, and as of a couple months, 2 months ago, they were still calling for presenters, which is,
Wow.
Last year, wasn't it like Thursday and Friday or something too? Because when you mentioned a Monday or Tuesday, that's not good for me, so.
yeah, sorry, it's a Monday and Tuesday. Is anybody interested?
Yeah, I am, and if it was a forum that would allow us to put a table up, I wouldn't mind discussing, the whole concept of reducing fertilizer and nutrient loading. I don't know if that's really a good forum for that, but we've talked about having an educational.
Pleasant Bay Alliance might be. I can see tables at conference.
I mean, they do a lot of work with that, the, Association for the Preservation of Cape Cod. There's a lot of resources out there, but we're trying to make a push on this. That might be.
I don't know if you ended up reading it, Amy, but I read an article where, that John mentioned, that just states that Chatham does not allow fertilizers to be used within 100 feet of a pond. I don't think it has anything to do with whether it's in an order of conditions. They actually just simply created a,
It's the Board of Health.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
they're citing, what is it now? I forget. It's been a while since I looked at that. but-
Toxicity in the ponds, I mean, it's a
But
danger.
it's a health issue as opposed to
Yeah.
like a conservation issue.
Yeah.
Absolutely, I
And
mean,
it's like it wasn't even Conservation Commission there that did it, it was the
Oh,
Board
I
of
actually
Health.
had
And the law that they cited, I read, and honestly, I really wondered about whether that would stand up to a challenge.
Yeah.
Their application of, I think it was state law. It Sounded like a really desirable approach, but I just wondered about whether, how,
I think it would when something's legitimate like that, and they look at it and say, these fertilizers are causing toxicity to the point that's potentially even fatal to humans in ponds. I don't see why it wouldn't stand up.
We are actually, so today, it's funny you mentioned this, I met with Natural Resources, Health, the town administrator, myself, all met to chat because Hinckley had a bloom. And we had to put an advisory up for Hinckley. And
Right,
there's a
yeah.
discussion of, health reasons. The reason that the State Board of Health will, close a pond is mostly because of E. coli and bacteria. Whereas algae is obviously another concern, but we don't, the testing isn't as frequent necessarily for that. And it all is all exacerbated by nutrient loading. So they're just, we're moving in this direction of becoming more stringent in the town for such things. I mean, it's really nice that the front office is interested in these issues. But I'll look into see what Chatham has and how they did it and how they enforce it.
We could also ask an opinion of council.
Yeah.
I think the way we just approved our regulations, it actually does say they can't use fertilizers. Doesn't matter, it doesn't say anything about anything else. It just says you can't use fertilizers within 100 feet of a,
Doesn't say whether you're in
of
front
a
of the commission
resource
or not.
or within, and maybe we should just ask council if that is appropriate and we'll hold up.
Sure.
So, and I would be supportive of that as is. I mean, to me, I think it's just something that, a change that really should be made.
Yeah.
I got a question. I know they've been monitoring like Muddy Creek since they put the bridge in. Is there any positive impact or negative impact? 'Cause did you see that article this morning about Sassuet
No.
Harbor where they had dredged there and it's had a negative impact on the marsh?
Oh.
And they said, they didn't expect that. And they put some bigger culverts under the bridge
Yeah,
there.
I knew that.
And it said how the marshes really deteriorated there. It was in this morning's paper,
I didn't see it.
that
Oh,
that
I
the
mean,
impact, because they said,
See it in the Times?
huh?
In the Times? I didn't see it in the
Didn't see
Times.
it.
We,
But I look at the online version.
I do too.
we
No, I get
conditioned
the
the Muddy
paper.
Creek project. It was a joint.
No, I know that, but I'm just saying,
We-
because they were just saying, it was supposed to be a positive thing, but it just turned out,
Yeah.
with all good intentions, but
Yeah,
I'm not sure why
The
it,
results.
I took a pretty thorough paddle inspection of that on Sunday for the first time in a year.
Muddy Creek or
Yeah.
Sassuet?
Muddy Creek,
Yeah.
and some of the, you've seen a pretty significant dieback of upland trees,
Yes.
which were in historic salt marsh, and the salt marsh is really coming back pretty nicely.
Mhm.
And you see salt marsh just, there's like pitch pine and oaks, and there's salt marsh out there. It's pretty interesting. I didn't see many areas where it was really overpowering Phragmites. There's only limited Phragmite invasion in there. And there are some interesting effects on the other side of the bridge where things are gonna
Mhm.
change there. I mean, that parking area might not last. I don't know what's
well,
gonna happen.
I commented to that, a couple of years ago when that happened. And I said, I foresee just from that current coming from under the bridge, it's gonna do away with Jackknife Beach eventually. And I
gonna
think it
change
was
it, yeah.
actually, who's the head of from Chatham,
Duncanson?
Dr.
Bob
Duncanson,
Duncanson.
right. I had talked to him at our conference 2 years ago about that, and he said they were monitoring it and they didn't see any change.
That was the initial.
But I
This-
mean, it's changing. I mean,
Yeah.
the sand in that edge of the river and everything, and it seems to be cutting through. But
Yeah. Our first, just to answer your question about the data, so the project completed 2 years ago. We just got the first year's data. It's, of that. We haven't evaluated it yet, literally just got it.
Oh, I know it. This
But that
started-
was data that was taken last year at this time, so.
Yeah.
They were talking, oh, I know it, this article is talking about, because of what they're talking about at Herring River up in Wellfleet, and what the potential, you know, even though they want to improve it there, they were referring to this one here.
Yeah.
And you don't know
Yeah,
what
model.
you might get.
You can't, unfortunately,
Who's
you
the
can't predict
consultant
everything.
for Muddy Creek? Who's doing the actual work?
Well, the consultant was Pleasant Bay Alliance, or Carol Ridley, but as far as who did the work, I can't remember the contractor
Yeah,
who did the work.
yep.
The name.
If we get a quiet moment, if you could share that with us, because that was a big issue, I felt, is to really document what happens.
Yeah,
And I think it was a 3-year requirement, or?
there's monitoring required, yeah, but
Yep.
everything's,
I would definitely recommend, you know, talk about these resources all the time, and it's a really dynamic process that's happening there,
Yep.
where, you know, in 2 years, you've gone from upland forest to
Yeah.
Spartina grass.
I know.
pretty
I know.
quick.
It was said to be a big enhancement for the sea-run fish, and I was always skeptical, and it's salty for that, you know?
I saw a couple of stripers in there.
I've seen, yeah, I've heard of a lot of reports of more juvenile.
Yeah, how about
Finfish.
soft-shell clams? Any
I didn't do any digging. I do dig on the other side, but I didn't notice any.
That was a big steamer spot commercially a long time ago.
I think it's gonna
Yeah.
take a lot longer to flush out.
Oh, yeah, they used to plunge, and, but it would get polluted.
Yeah.
So it
Yeah.
was an early place shut down before there were shutdowns in other parts of town. But people used to make money up there plunging steamers.
There used to be a lot of eels in there. I don't know if there still are.
Yeah.
I knew people who had eel pots in there.
Right.
Okay,
So we good?
we're good.
Okay, well,
Is everybody gonna be here for the 17th?
As far as I know.
I'd like to be someplace else, I think. It's gonna be a busy one.
Yeah.
All right. There we go. Well, thanks, Amy.
Thank you.
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.